Today, we're going to do an episode that's in two parts. We did the worst presidents, top 10. We're going to do the best presidents, top 10. We're going to divide it into two episodes because we didn't want it to be too long, quite frankly. And listen, before we even start, I wanted to send a plea to you all. We need your likes. We need your subscriptions, and we need your comments. So as you listen to these, if there's somebody that you would like to have removed or that you would like to include somebody else, please let us know. We'd be happy to hear about that. Today, we're going to begin our countdown of the 10 best presidents in U.S. history.
Our list differs from the rankings commonly produced by historians. We are considering accomplishments, crisis leadership, economic policy, civil rights, international affairs, and the long-term effects of presidential decisions.
And we are also giving unusual weight to constitutional restraint. For that reason, Abraham Lincoln is not included.
Lincoln preserved the Union and played a central role in finally ending African slavery. Those achievements were enormous, but his suspension of habeas corpus, military arrests of civilians, detention without trial, restrictions on newspapers, the illegal creation of West Virginia, and a major expansion of executive authority raised serious constitutional questions.
Yes, indeed. Some historians defend those decisions as wartime necessities. Others argue that constitutional protections matter most during emergencies, when leaders are most tempted to discard them.
Our exclusion of Lincoln certainly does not deny his importance. It reflects the standards we are using for this particular discussion.
Yeah, we were also including Jimmy Carter, whose presidency and extraordinary post presidential service will be examined in part two.
Look at our Carter podcast for more details on that. But as always, ladies and gentlemen, best does not mean perfect. Every president on this list made mistakes, supported questionable policies, or failed to address important problems. We're just beginning a dialogue here, folks.
In this first episode, we will count down from number 10 through number 6.
Let us begin with John F. Kennedy.
JFK, he served for a little less than 3 years, making his place on any top 10 list debatable, I suppose.
His strongest claim rests on the successful management of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. American intelligence discovered Soviet nuclear missile sites being constructed in Cuba, only 90 miles from Florida.
Some of Kennedy's military advisors recommended immediate airstrikes followed by an invasion. Kennedy instead ordered a naval quarantine and opened negotiations with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. Hold on, let me say that again. Khrushchev.
That controversial decision gave both sides time to step back. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. The United States publicly promised not to invade Cuba and later privately agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey and limit them in Italy.
Yes. Now, Kennedy's caution may have prevented a direct military confrontation between two nuclear powers, a pretty important thing.
Absolutely, Dr. Weaver. He also established the Peace Corps, supported the space program, and challenged the United States to land a person on the moon before the end of the 1960s.
Boy, I remember that speech, Dr. Dineen. Partly because of his accent, I have to say. He said, we vow to put a man on the moon before the end of this decade.
A
Yeah,
Massachusetts accent is a little different than people from New Jersey and Virginia.
you got it. You know, Kennedy eventually became more forceful on civil rights, although he initially moved cautiously because he feared losing support from Southern Democrats in Congress.
His failures were significant. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating disaster. American involvement in Vietnam increased during his presidency, and his administration participated in covert operations against foreign governments, sometimes in alliance with organized crime.
Kennedy's presidency was brief and unfinished. He ranks 10th primarily because of his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis and his ability to create a strong sense of national purpose.
Number 9, Barack Obama. Barack Obama entered office in January 2009 during the most severe economic crisis since the Great Depression.
Yeah, banks were failing, unemployment was rising, and the automobile industry was in danger of collapse. Obama continued financial stabilization efforts, supported an economic stimulus program, and helped restructure General Motors and Chrysler, too.
The economy recovered, although recovery was slower and less evenly distributed than many Americans wanted.
Obama's major domestic achievement was the Affordable Care Act. It expanded access to health insurance, created marketplaces for private insurance, and prevented insurance companies from denying coverage because of pre existing conditions. A very important thing.
Absolutely. The law remained controversial. Premiums and deductible remained high for some families, and Obama's promise that people could always keep their existing plans and doctors if they liked them proved inaccurate in some cases.
Yeah, internationally, Obama authorized the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, which is something that sort of bothers me. He negotiated the Iran nuclear agreement and joined the Paris Climate Accords, thank goodness.
His foreign policy record also contained some serious problems. The intervention in Libya helped remove Muammar Gaddafi but contributed to instability and civil conflict. The war in Afghanistan continued, drone warfare expanded, our allies in Egypt and Tunisia were overthrown, and the detention faculty at Guantanamo Bay remained open.
Obama's election as the first African American president was historically important. It represented progress that would have appeared almost impossible during much of American history.
To our shame, you're quite correct. However, racial and political divisions remained severe and partisan hostility intensified during his presidency.
Yeah, because his presidency is still relatively recent, Obama's final historical ranking may change. He is included here for economic crisis management, critical to this country, healthcare reform, critical, and his significance and the significance of his election as an African American. Let's move into LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, Johnson had one of the most productive domestic presidencies in all of American history.
You're quite right. Johnson understood Congress better than almost any modern president. He used personal pressure, political bargaining, and detailed knowledge of individual lawmakers and their interests and flaws to pass major legislation.
Yeah, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public accommodations and employment. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 attacked the legal barriers used to prevent Black Americans from voting, also very significant.
Johnson also signed legislation creating Medicare and Medicaid. His Great Society program expanded federal support for education. anti-poverty programs, public broadcasting, consumer protection, and environmental conservation.
These programs permanently changed the relationship between the federal government and American citizens.
Johnson's presidency, however, was devastated by Vietnam. He greatly expanded American military involvement despite doubts within his own administration about whether the war could be won at an acceptable military or personal cost.
The government repeatedly presented optimistic assessments that did not match conditions on the ground. That credibility gap contributed to a broad decline in public trust.
More than 58,000 American service members died in the conflict. Millions of Vietnamese soldiers on both sides and civilians were also killed.
Vietnam divided the country, weakened Johnson's domestic agenda, and eventually persuaded him not to seek another term.
Johnson's legacy is deeply divided. His civil rights and health care accomplishments place him among the most consequential and effective domestic presidents. His Vietnam decisions prevented him from ranking higher.
So let's move into Harry S. Truman. Do you know what that middle initial stands for, Dr. Dineen?
It actually stands for nothing. He just
Uh
liked the idea of having a middle initial.
huh. All right.
He became president suddenly after Franklin Roosevelt, the longest serving president in American history, died in April 1945.
Truman had been vice president for only a few months and had not been informed about major wartime plans, including the development of the atomic bomb.
He was immediately forced to make decisions that shaped the conclusion of World War II and the beginning of the 45-year-long Cold War.
Truman approved the use of atomic bombs against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Supporters argue that the bombs forced Japan's surrender and avoided a costly invasion. Critics argue that Japan was already approaching defeat and that the attacks killed enormous numbers of civilians and had a lengthy period of time when there was nuclear poisoning there.
I'm sorry to say, folks, that debate is unlikely ever to disappear.
Truman's administration supported the Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Western Europe after the war. It also helped create NATO and established a policy of resisting Soviet expansion.
At home, Truman ordered the desegregation of the armed forces, prohibited racial discrimination in federal employment.
He also defended civilian control of the military by removing General Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War. MacArthur had publicly challenged the administration's policies and pushed for a wider conflict, also bringing China into the war.
Listen to our MacArthur podcast to learn more about that. The Korean War ended without a clear victory, and Truman left office extremely unpopular. Later historians viewed his decisions more favorably, particularly his role in building the post-war international system.
Yes, and Truman ranks seventh because he made difficult decisions during an extraordinarily dangerous transition from World War to nuclear rivalry. Let's turn our attention to Dwight David Eisenhower. Eisenhower was once described as a passive president who delegated most of his responsibilities.
That's not really accurate. Later research showed that Eisenhower often practiced what historians call a hidden hand style of leadership. He worked privately, asked detailed questions, and allowed others to take public credit or blame.
His administration supported the interstate highway system and expanded Social Security and presided over a period of considerable economic growth.
Eisenhower ended the active fighting in Korea and avoided a direct war with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. His military background made him skeptical of generals who automatically demanded more weapons and continually larger budgets.
Yeah, that concern led to his farewell warning about the growing power of the military industrial complex. And he wrote quite an amazing treatise on that.
He did. However, Eisenhower's reputation for military caution must be balanced against his decisions in Vietnam.
In 1954, Eisenhower publicly promoted what became known as the Domino Theory. He argued that if Vietnam fell under communist control, neighboring countries in Southeast Asia might fall one after the other like dominoes.
And that theory became central justification for increasing American involvement in the region.
The United States already had a limited military advisory presence in French Indochina, but after the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu and the division of Vietnam under the Geneva Agreements, Eisenhower committed the United States to supporting a separate anti communist government in South Vietnam.
His administration provided money, weapons, political support, and military personnel to assist the government of Ngo Dinh Diem. American advisors increasingly helped organize and train the South Vietnamese armed forces.
By the time the French military withdrew, the advisory effort had largely become an American responsibility.
The United States was not yet fighting a large ground war, but it was becoming deeply invested in the survival of the South Vietnamese government.
That distinction does matter. Eisenhower did not send hundreds of thousands of combat troops who would later fight in Vietnam. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson greatly expanded the conflict, even though it started with Eisenhower.
But they did not begin with an empty slate. Eisenhower left behind military advisors, increasing financial commitments, contingency plans, and a foreign policy doctrine that portrayed the fate of South Vietnam as essential to American security.
His reliance on the domino theory discouraged serious consideration of Vietnam's nationalism, colonial history, and internal political divisions.
A complicated regional conflict was increasingly viewed as one part of a worldwide monolithic communist conspiracy.
That interpretation helped lay the foundation for a war that would kill more than 58,000 American service members, devastate Vietnam and neighboring countries, and severely damage public trust in the United States government.
In some ways, it hasn't recovered. On civil rights, Eisenhower signed the first federal civil rights laws since Reconstruction. He appointed many African American officials in the White House and other areas. He also sent federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, when state officials attempted to prevent black students from attending Central High School.
However, he was generally cautious about the broader civil rights movement and did not provide the strong moral leadership that activists wanted.
His administration also authorized covert interventions in Iran and Guatemala. Those operations removed governments considered unfriendly to American business and political interests, but they contributed to long-term instability and anti-American resentment.
Eisenhower deserves credit for maintaining stability during a dangerous phase of the Cold War, strengthening national infrastructure and avoiding a direct conflict with the Soviet Union.
But his decisions in Vietnam significantly weakened his record. The commitment made after 1954 did not make the later war inevitable, but it created the political, financial, and military foundation upon which Kennedy and Johnson would build.
For that reason, Eisenhower remains on our list, but he cannot be remembered only as the president who kept America out of war, because he didn't.
In Vietnam, he helped place the United States on the road toward one.
That's right. Okay, that completes the first half of our countdown.
So far, our list includes John F. Kennedy at number 10, Barack Obama at number 9, Lyndon Johnson at 8, Harry Truman at 7, and Dwight Eisenhower at 6.
Yeah, a pretty good list of people, huh? Each combined important accomplishments with various failures, reminding us why presidential rankings are never simple at all.
In part 2, we will reveal numbers 5 through 1.
That list will include a president whose greatest public service may actually have come after he left office. Two influential presidents from the nation's early history, and the president who we believe has the strongest overall claim to number one.
Ladies and gentlemen, which of the first 5 choices would you remove and who would you add?
Let us know in the comments. Please, please give the episode a like and subscribe to Things You Don't Know.
Thank you for listening. Join us soon for part 2 of the 10 best presidents in United States history. Bye for now.